Chapter 1. So I became a soldier. When word of Fort Sumter's fall reached him in Washington, President Abraham Lincoln acted quickly, issuing a call for 75,000 volunteers to put down the insurrection. News of the president's call to arms spread with surprising speed by telegraph, newspaper headlines, and word of mouth. Thomas Galway was 15 years old and living in Cleveland, Ohio when he heard. As I was coming from Mass this morning, Galway wrote in his journal, I saw bulletins posted everywhere announcing the bombardment of Fort Sumter. Large crowds were gathered in front of each bulletin board, people peering over one another's heads to catch a bit of the news. All seemed of one mind. Everyone talked of war. Over in Indiana, 14-year-old Theodore Upson was working in the cornfield with his father, when a neighbor came by. William Corey came across the field. He had been to town after the mail. He was excited and said, "The Rebs have fired upon and taken Fort Sumter." Father got white and couldn't say a word. William said, "The president will soon fix them. He has called for 75,000 men and is going to blockade their ports. And just as soon as those fellows find out that the North means business, they will get down off their high horse." Much the same was happening in the South. Newspapers hailed the victory at Sumter and predicted that the North would not risk any sort of military action. Public meetings were held to whip up support for the Confederate government. T.G. Barker, then just 13, was attending a small private school in South Carolina. "We were in class," Barker remembered, "all bent over our books, when Headmaster Hammond entered. He did not knock to announce himself, which was unusual, and he did not speak to our teacher either. This was also unusual. He went instead to the middle of the room and said in a serious voice, 'We have had word this morning. Fort Sumter has surrendered and is now a part of the Confederate States of America.' Then he smiled. A second passed, and not a sound. Then, as if a shot from a cannon, the class stood as one and cheered, 'Hooray! Hooray!' The political and social causes of the war were numerous and complex, and still produce arguments among historians. Certainly, the profound cultural differences between the North and the South were a factor, as were their opposing views on the issue of states' rights. And there is little doubt that an important element of the split was the institution of slavery. Many in the North saw slavery as evil and wanted it abolished completely. Others would accept slavery if it could be confined to the South, or if the South agreed to phase it out over a number of years. For its part, the South viewed slavery as vital to its economic survival. Agriculture, especially the growing of cotton, was its most important business. Slavery provided the cheap labor needed to bring in crops at a profit. Without slavery, Southerners argued, their entire way of life would crumble and be destroyed. Intensifying matters was the fact that Southern interests were trying to introduce slavery in the newly settled Western regions. Many in the North felt that slavery had to be stopped before it had a chance to spread and take hold in the West. As far as Southerners were concerned, the federal government was nothing more than an interfering bully trying to force its views on them. The slavery question was not a new one at all. It had been discussed and debated, argued and fumed over for nearly 50 years. Tempers were frayed to the point of exploding, and fights had even taken place on the floor of the Senate. When war actually broke out, it was like a pressure release valve. At last, the country seemed to sigh with relief. Something concrete was finally going to settle the dispute. The result on both sides was an enthusiastic rush to enlist. Men crowded the recruitment centers in the nearest cities or signed on with locally organized units. Emotions ran so high that everywhere enlistment quotas were being met and surpassed easily. Caught up in all of this were boys. Generally, boys from the North did not join the army because they felt a burning desire to stamp out slavery. One boy's comment about slavery is fairly typical. "I do not know anything about it, whether it is a good thing or a bad thing," he wrote in a letter. and when talk gets around to it, I say very little. Many joined because they wanted to take the defiant South and set them straight, but most signed up for a simpler reason, to escape the boring routine of farm life and take part in an exciting adventure. The same spirit of adventure and glory motivated Southern boys as well. A Mississippi recruit said he had joined to fight the Yankees, all fun and frolic. But underneath the festive attitude was another deeply felt reason for serving: to defend their homes from a large invading army. One Southern boy made his feelings clear: "I'd rather die than become a slave to the North." Each side had recruitment rules that expressly banned boys from joining and fighting. At the start of the war, for instance, the Union held that a recruit had to be at least 18 years old. In spite of this, a tall 14 or 15-year-old could easily blend into a crowd of men and slip through in the hurry to form a unit. Those questioned about their age might be able to bluff their way past a wary recruitment sergeant. Anyway, how would a recruiter check on an applicant's facts? The standard forms of identification we have today, such as a driver's license, social security number, and credit cards, did not exist back then. There were no computers or telephones either, so verifying someone's birthday was nearly impossible. By far the easiest way for a boy to slip into the army was as a musician, especially as a drummer or bugler. These were considered non-fighting positions, so recruiters often allowed a boy to sign on without worrying about his age. The Union Army alone had need of over 40,000 musicians, while an estimated 20,000 served for the South. Many boys found it surprisingly simple to enlist for duty that would take them into the thick of fighting. Thomas Galway did. The day after the surrender of Fort Sumter, Galway visited a nearby armory run by a group called the Cleveland Greys. But they did not seem to me to be the sort of stuff that soldiers are made of, so I went anyway. So I went away. That evening, I went to the armory of the Hibernian Guards. They seemed to like me, and I liked them. So together with Jim Butler and Jim O'Reilly, I enlisted with them. My name was the first on the company's roll to enlist. I didn't tell them that I was only 15, so I became a soldier. On occasion, a boy would enter with the blessings of one or both parents. Ned Hutter went to join the Confederate Army near his hometown in Mississippi. When the recruitment officer asked his age, Ned told him the truth. "I am 16 next June," I said. The officer ordered me out of line, and my father, who was behind me, stepped to the table. "He can work as steady as any man," my father explained, "and he can shoot as straight as any who has been signed today. I'm the boy's father." It must have been the way he said the words, because the officer handed me the pen and ordered, "Sign here." Such support was rare, however, and most boys had to get in by less honest means. A 15-year-old Wisconsin boy, Elisha Stockwell Jr., was one of them. "We heard there was going to be a war meeting at our little log schoolhouse," Stockwell recalled. "I went to the meeting, and when they called for volunteers, Harrison Maxon, 21, Edgar Houghton, 16, and myself put our names down. My father was there and objected to my going, so they scratched my name out, which humiliated me somewhat. My sister gave me a severe calling down for exposing my ignorance before the public, and called me a little snotty boy, which raised my anger. I told her, 'Never mind, I'll go and show you that I am not the little boy you think I am.'" Elisha's hurt and anger calmed after his sister and mother apologized for what had been said. He even promised not to enlist again if he could attend school that winter. They agreed, and Elisha put aside his zeal to fight the Confederacy. Unfortunately, Elisha's father had other plans for Elisha's winter. He'd signed up himself and his son to burn charcoal, a tedious, dirty, and back-breaking job. When Elisha learned this, he devised a new plan to enlist. First, he told his parents he was going to a dance in town. Then he persuaded a friend's father, a captain in the Union Army, to accompany him to a nearby recruitment center. The captain got me in by my lying a little. As I told the recruiting officer, I didn't know just how old I was, but thought I was 18. He didn't measure my height, but called me 5 feet 5 inches high. So I wasn't that tall 2 years later when I re enlisted. But they let it go, so the records show that that is my height. Elisha went home to gather up some clothes and found his sister in the kitchen preparing dinner. He did not mention anything about fighting for the Union, and after a brief conversation, I told her I had to go downtown. She said, "Hurry back, for dinner will be ready soon." But I didn't get back home for 2 years.